I'm Dave Conover, and I've got the pleasure of moderating this particular session. This is the industry panel, and our objectives here for this session are to understand the progress that the electricity sector has been making in diversifying the resource mix, and to understand a little bit about what the sector sees as the challenges, opportunities, and key questions before industry as we embark on this 111D journey. We've really got a great panel here. We got three engineers flanked by two policy guys. Bob Balzar, to my immediate left, is principal consultant at the Tennessee ValleyAuthority. He's in the External Relations Strategic Business Unit and has had a very long and interesting career in the field. Previously, he was VP of Energy Efficiency and Demand Response, an area that will come up in this conversation, I'm sure. He's also worked at Seattle City Light and at Sierra Pacific Power and Nevada Power Companies. His full bio and all of the full bios are in your packets, and I encourage you to take a look at those. To Bob's left is Pam Faggart, who, and I'm sure we always say this, don't use the acronym, Chief Environmental Officer and Vice President at Dominion. She's had a 20-year career with Dominion, and I have to say I'm a happy customer, so thanks for that. Previous to that work at Dominion, she was also in the air division of the Virginia DEQ, so looking forward to Pam's perspective on these issues. Another engineer next to Pam is Don Ryan. He is Manager of Advanced Technology Development at Babcock & Wilcox, the power generation group. And then finally, last but not least, Tom Vinson is VP for Federal Regulatory Affairs at the American Wind Energy Association, where he handles a wide portfolio of issues for OWEA and also holds a distinction that not a lot of people in this town can claim, having worked on both sides of Capitol Hill in the House and the Senate. So we're very grateful to these folks for taking time out from their busy schedules. And I would say, too, that Senator Dorgan's session really set a high bar for audience participation and questions that you submitted. Encourage you to do that as well. We're looking to crowdsource this session also. So with that, we'll start. And as you can tell, we've got two utilities and essentially two technology providers here to discuss these issues. And these questions are going to be framed around the utility thoughts and objectives, but we'll then ask the technology providers to provide the same perspective on those same issues. So we're looking forward to a very interesting session, and again, I encourage you all to submit questions. The first one, just in general, I'd like to ask each of you to describe some of the programs and projects in place at your company, currently yielding great greenhouse gas reductions, as well as some insight into why you started this ahead of any regulatory or legal requirement to do so. Bob?
So at TVA, we have been working for many years under a guiding principle from our Chief Executive Office, started under Tom Kilgore and now continued with Bill Johnson, around cleaner energy. So affordable, cleaner energy is really the buzzword around our business, and what we've done over the last several years is, I think, fairly remarkable for us. We have retired 18 coal plants out of a total of 59. We have put in service about 1,600 megawatts of wind. We have put in service over 100 megawatts of solar at about 1,600 sites. Of course, the solar PV on residential, small commercial operations is the lion's share of that. We have about 100 megawatts of biogas landfill projects as well. We have been adding adding natural gas to replace some of those coal plants. And we feel like we've done a pretty good job at keeping our eye on where we expect the ball to be.
Great, thank you. Pam?
Sure. At Dominion, we've believed for some time that we can expect some sort of carbon constraints on the energy industry. And in addition, there's been big changes in the market, including the important change in the price and availability of natural gas. So we've made quite a few business decisions that have resulted in making better generation choices for our customers that at the same time have reduced our carbon emissions. In 2005, we had 55 million tons of CO2 emissions. By 2012, it was down to 35 million tons, so significant reductions in tons. We've also reduced our carbon intensity significantly for our Dominion Virginia power fleet. We've reduced our intensity by 28% since 2000. So that's great environmental progress. How have we accomplished that? Primarily by shutting down or converting to a different fuel, our coal-fired power plants. We used to have 17 coal-fired power plants. By 2015 or 16, we'll have 5, so there's a big change there. Our new build has been natural gas or renewable energy. So we've done a lot to reduce our emissions, and generally speaking, by changing our fuel mix.
Great, thank you. Don, what's B&W's perspective on the greenhouse gas reduction technology available?
Yeah, B&W's been working on environmental controls for really the better part of 50 years, starting with the Clean Air Act and reducing NOx, reducing SO2 emissions. Probably in the order of 10 to 15 years ago, we started programs to look at carbon capture programs. We're currently involved in the Future Gen 2 project that we're anxiously awaiting to actually go forward. So we can actually demonstrate oxycombustion and carbon capture from oxycombustion. In addition to that, we have programs that focus on other forms of carbon capture with solvents, with membranes, and even some really out there technology called cold direct chemical looping. And so we're deeply involved in that. The other thing, though, that we've been working on in support of our customers like TVA and Dominion is how do we make the existing fleet, the coal plants that are going to remain, are going to have to respond to the daily cycling of solar and wind, availability of natural gas, and so on. So we've been working hard for many years trying to figure out how to help them make the boilers and the power plants more nimble, better able to cycle up and down, take on and off cycling, and that kind of thing. So we're kind of in a mode of trying to anticipate what's going to be needed ahead of the curve so we have time to do the R&D to develop it and to react to the demands and the instantaneous demands of our customers.
Great. Tom, wind came up a lot in the previous panel, and of course that's an obvious strategy there, but talk a little bit about deployment and some of the drivers that you see out there.
Sure, and appreciate the recognition from the state regulators, in particular about the role that wind is already playing in terms of reducing emissions. Obviously, as a non-polluting resource, we don't have a compliance obligation. The wind farms do not themselves, so our interest in 111D is primarily as a compliance tool for states and regulated entities. So our new annual market report is actually coming out this week. It'll show we've got 61,000 megawatts deployed in 39 states and Puerto Rico, so widely available. Even in states, if you see our blue deployment map or our green state penetration map, you'll see a lot of white in the southeast. But even in those states, the utilities have been signing contracts to purchase wind from other states. So again, a widely available option. And the report will also talk about, in terms of existing emissions reductions, it's nearly 100 million tons a year of carbon, 100,000, I think, or 109,000 tons of SO2 and 75,000 tons of NOx and 38 billion gallons of water saved. So it's not just carbon, it's a solution that provides a variety of benefits as well.
Great, great. Now, we've heard a lot at the first two sessions so far today about the uncertainties that play, and I want to talk a little bit about that. On the one hand, we're going to see, we hope, a proposal come out next month or in June, with states having another year to put their SIPs together, and then whether those are approved or not, and parallel track litigation that may well delay that. Given that type of uncertainty, you're not going to know what the standard is until the proposal comes out. You're not going to know what the state plans are until they get approved, and you've got litigation all throughout the process. How do you plan around that kind of uncertainty? Is it a scenario planning basis, or talk a little bit about strategies and approaches that you can use to hedge your regulatory risk?
Sure. At TVA, we do our resource planning in a integrated resource planning process. We did the last one came out in 2011, and it put us on a path towards what we would call a balanced portfolio, as most utilities think about that. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. We are, as we speak, doing our next round of the integrated resource plan. We're tuning up the models. We're getting all the inputs as we speak. Public process has gone underway for a couple of months, public comment process. And, you know, the folks will be turning the cranks, running the models. And what we do in our model analysis is we look at both strategies and scenarios. Scenarios are things we can't really control, the economic variabilities that are out there in the marketplace, technology that's coming in place. And then we develop strategies that respond in a lowest risk, lowest cost matrix for meeting the various scenarios and strategies. So this is a good process. We think the process is robust enough to carry us through whatever the anticipated regulations are and however the rulemaking goes within, you know, our 9 states that we work in. We're going to be, you know, very much involved in working with those states to make sure we're seen as a solutions provider, and we think that's going to be good. So really, I think the integrated resource plan process for us will be robust enough to get us through all the expected outcomes of this.
Good to hear. And Pam, you talked earlier about it, having an anticipation of CO2 restrictions in the future. So are you looking at your scenario process changing much with the 111D, or again, is it robust enough to carry through this process now?
Well, the things that we're concerned about continuing to have a diverse fuel mix. That's very important for our customers and for our shareholders. We're concerned, as some other speakers have mentioned today, about the length of time we'll have to comply with whatever the new standards are. We're concerned about the costs. We need to ensure that we, you know, continue to provide energy to our customers at a good, fair cost, although we do expect that the price of power will go up as a result of these rules in the United States. And we also, like other speakers have mentioned, want to ensure that we continue to focus on grid reliability. You can't have all renewable energy. I already mentioned we're reducing the amount of fuel in our generation mix. We're adding to our renewable portfolio. We have 775 megawatts now. We're going to increase it to 1274. We're also working on a potential offshore wind farm. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is the importance of new nuclear. That is no emitting generation, and we are working on obtaining a COL for a possible new nuclear facility. He already mentioned the importance of having a good IRP. You know, it's been great to see today the utility regulators and the environmental regulators sitting down and talking to each other. So that's a great thing about a forum like this. And I think those conversations need to be happening nationwide. And we're trying to make that happen in Virginia. For example, in our IRP, we didn't just submit the low-cost plan, which is required. We submitted 7 or 8 additional plans, all of which have different environmental outcomes to show if you have a certain amount of renewable generation, what the financial impacts would be on that scenario, so that when the time comes and when EPA comes out with their rules, we're better able to be able to predict the impact on the price, on the reliability, and the environmental impacts of each of those scenarios.
Great. Okay. And Don, as a technology provider to the sector, how do you factor in 111D or regulatory risk in general in your long-term strategic planning activities?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the truth is we don't know what direction all of this is going, and many of the solutions that we might provide to the industry take many years to develop and bring to commercialization. So really what we have to do is keep our technology current and ready to roll out on a variety of fronts. We have biomass burning technology, both in co-firing in existing plants and new biomass facilities. We're working with CHP was talked about earlier as a solution. We have a large industrial customer base that we're working with them to see what can be done in that. But probably the most important thing is we have to get our folks out and talking to our customers and kind of getting a feel for where you guys are headed, what you're thinking about, so we know how to focus our R&D budget to be ready for those eventualities.
And of course, Tom, the majority of states and the vast majority of the population are covered by renewable portfolio standards. How does 111D stack up as a driver, a market driver for your members vis-a-vis RPS or the production tax credit, those kinds of things?
Well, obviously it's going to depend on what the EPA does in June and the following June. which we don't know. But I think what we're trying to do right now is listen to what the states and some of the other stakeholders are saying in terms of wanting compliance options outside the fence line, for example, wanting the flexibility to use existing state policies, RPS, RGGI, et cetera, even the IRP processes or long-term contracting processes as a policy mechanism for compliance. So we've been trying to talk through those policies and the options that would be available should the EPA bless sort of outside the fence line options, or should they stay silent on it and states be allowed to move forward on their own with those. I think in terms of the market opportunity, I don't think we view it as big of a market opportunity as the two policies you mentioned in terms of tax credits driving deployment and existing state RPSs, but we do view it as a close third. So I think we can talk more about the cost and reliability issues, but that's sort of the other role we've been playing to date, is talking through these questions that people have, the challenges that people see, and talking through what the actual experience with wind has been around the country.
Just to follow up, Pam, on something you just mentioned about the collegiality, the collaboration between environmental officers in the states and the energy folks in the states. Gina mentioned at the top of the session today that 111D has not been widely used. And so we're setting out on something that's somewhat unknown, somewhat untested, in an area that's extremely important and complex. How confident are you that in your service areas, and ask the same of Bob, that you'll see this sort of collaborative effort in the SIP development going forward after the guidance comes out?
Would you like me to start?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I don't know if confidence is the right thing. I think we need to ensure it happens. It won't happen by accident. You know, it's, as you point out, not the normal way for the environmental regulators to work through their SIP process, working with the utility regulators. So it's critical that we make it happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the best outcome will be through that type of collaboration, and the worst outcome will be with no collaboration.
Right.
So I suspect reality will be someplace in the middle, but you know, let's hope that it's more towards the collaborative side of the equation.
Now, the previous panel, there was a fair amount of discussion to distributed generation, and we just raised combined heat and power. There are huge changes going on, as you know better than anybody, in the electric power sector that affect your business models, affect your approaches. How do you see 111D either complementing those changes, or are there areas of concern in that where the process could in fact negatively impact those changes? Can you talk a little bit about the changing nature of the sector itself and the interaction with 111D?
Well, yeah, you are right that their changes are real. They're happening, and they're probably happening faster than our, you know, more state industry can absorb. It's going to be a real test of agility for all of us in the electric utility industry, and that includes those folks on the regulation side. My belief is that through focusing on a balanced portfolio, through an integrated resource plan process, which really takes care of, you know, a wide range of future scenarios, I do believe that we'll be ahead of all the regulation, I think is what I'm trying to say. I do believe that if you listen to what your customers are asking for through an integrated resource planning process, and you're moving towards a balanced, cleaner portfolio, and you're focused on at least the least cost option under a most reasonable scenario for the future. So you got to have all those ands lined up, which is what we're supposed to do. That's our business. If you line up all those things, I actually believe we'll be ahead of that curve.
Great view to have. Pam, what's your perspective on that issue?
You know, in order for the things like outside the fence options and energy efficiency to count, if you will, for EPA's programs, EPA is going to have to allow the states the flexibility to consider those things as they come up with their requirements to meet, you know, what will arguably be an inside the fence requirement. So we do actively support EPA allowing that flexibility. You know, you asked specifically what companies are doing. I know at Dominion we are implementing some more energy efficiency programs. We have a research group, Alternative Energy Solutions, that in addition to their offshore wind work has also come up with a new patented technology called EDGE, which is designed to reduce voltage. If there's any utility here who's interested in EDGE, please see me afterwards. So that's a way that companies can ensure that their customers use less energy, so there's a financial benefit for the customers, and anytime you use less energy, you also have an environmental benefit as well.
And let me just build on that, because I was remiss in speaking earlier when I did not include what I did when I came to TVA, which was a very robust set of energy efficiency and demand response programs. We've got, you know, over the last 5 years, we've built the equivalent of an 1,100 megawatt, what we call a virtual power plant. And so that, combined with our renewable strategy that I outlined, we're going to have a 1,100 megawatt nuclear plant come online. I don't see any wood up here. We should be knocking on wood towards the end of next year, which will be, you know, the first, not really a new nuclear plant. It's a plant that was built many years ago, but we have got it licensed, and we're now in a fueling process. And you know, that's 1,100 megawatts of nuclear, 1,100 megawatts of energy efficiency, a couple thousand megawatts of renewables. In a, you know, in a 35,000 megawatt portfolio, it makes a difference.
So that's a great segue. The outside the fence energy efficiency is going to be brought up, I believe, in the panel directly after lunch. But now talk about a little bit about inside the fence, boiler efficiency. Are there further gains that can be made there that are material?
There are probably some gains. Most of the plants that we're involved in and servicing on a day-to-day basis have some opportunities, but they're fairly small. They really are fairly small for an existing plant. If you include turbine upgrades with those, you expand the horizon a little bit, but those are very costly repairs. They involve changes in heat rate, and dare I say it, the specter of a new source review if you implement those kind of changes. So there are some things that can be done, but the gains you can get from that are fairly modest. You know, perhaps the best thing we've done from an efficiency standpoint is our work and development of ultra supercritical and advanced ultra supercritical technologies, which really give a step change efficiency improvement over the older existing fleet. But then those all have to be, those are new plants, they have to be permitted and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a tough business, and there are some gains, but they're incremental. They're not step change kind of things.
Right, and Tom, we spoke about this briefly during the break. The last panel, there was a significant discussion of energy storage, and I thought we'd get your perspective on the technology development path and the deployment path for wind itself, and where those lines might need to intersect, where you're more confident perhaps in the near term than others perhaps may say about the need, the criticality of the need for energy storage in the near term to accommodate growth in wind.
Sure, and if you don't mind, I want to briefly just mention sort of the potential too for wind to go kind of down the panel. So as I mentioned earlier, we're reducing about 100 million tons of carbon already. The 12 gigawatts that are currently under construction will raise that to about 117 million, or about 5.3% of power sector emissions. The National Renewable Energy Lab has done studies in both the Eastern Interconnection and the Western Interconnection, and PJM just had a renewables integration study come out for wind and solar. And what all three of those studies show is if you have renewable penetration from roughly 20 to 30%, you can get carbon emission reductions of somewhere between 20 and 40%. So there is huge potential. In terms of the integration issues, Iowa is already at 25% wind, and that's electric generation, not installed capacity. South Dakota is already at 25%. There's, I think, 9 states are over 12%, and 17 states are over 5%. And if you look at the grid operator level, so MISO, ERCOT, California ISO, et cetera, SPP, they have, the state numbers, by the way, are all average annual numbers. But the grid operators have been even significantly higher than that at times during the year, up in the 30 to 35% range. So, and that is sort of with existing storage capabilities such as they are. So our view is, and I think the DOE 20% report from 2008 under the previous presidential administration said that you can integrate an awful lot of wind without the need for significant storage. Now, if storage becomes more cost effective, then absolutely it should be a part of the mix. There are some wind developers that are using storage in limited circumstances. For example, in Hawaii, given the island grid, there are some wind farms in Texas and West Virginia, I believe, that are using it to provide regulating services to the grid operators. So there's absolutely a role. Our general view has been that it's more of a grid scale role, grid level role, as opposed to having to co-locate it with each individual wind farm. Because the way the grid works is every power plant backs up every other power plant. So as we've seen with the cold winter we've had, conventional power plants go offline too, either because of fuel supply issues or mechanical issues, et cetera. So storage makes sense to deal with all those sources of variability as opposed to just the variability which, from renewables, which when you look at the grand scheme of things is minor incremental variability to the variability in load and other things that grid operators already deal with.
Well, and that sort of raises another question about the efficacy of individualized state SIP processes for attacking a problem like greenhouse gases. And of course, all along people have been saying that the Clean Air Act is an unwieldy and bulky tool to deal with all this. One way to get around that, and we're going to hear more on this after the lunch hour, is multi-state strategies. And I'm just curious from your service areas perspective, Bob and Pam, if you see states in which you operate able and willing and interested in collaborating themselves on multi-state SIPs or multi-state or coordinated submission or some sort of coordinated strategy that could lower costs and increase reliability.
Yeah, for of course a federal entity like TVA that spans 9 states in our service territory, and we're very sensitive to kind of stepping into state regulation, state laws, state jurisdiction where we shouldn't, and vice versa. So I think I'm just going to say to that we're going to encourage state collaboration because we are a multi-state source, and we probably could be a multi-state solution.
There you go. Pam, any perspective on that issue?
Yeah, I agree that EPA, we fully support EPA allowing the states the flexibility to coordinate with each other. Energy does not respect state lines. Power lines go across state lines. Pollution goes across state lines. The regulation should also go across state lines.
Excellent.
And David, if I could also add,
Please.
the wind industry has been supportive of multi-state efforts as well because, at the end of the day, the local wind resource may not be the most economical and you may want to get it from another state. So I think we're going to have to deal with those cross-border issues, whether there's an official sort of multi-state plan or not, we're going to have to deal with those cross-border accounting issues.
And from B&W's standpoint, of course, supporting companies like TVA and AEP and those are all multi-state entities. And we're expecting that there will have to be cooperation in order for any kind of compliance strategy to emerge.
Okay, well, we're starting to get some questions coming in from the audience, and I just say fasten your seatbelts here, panelists.
Okay.
This says for Dominion and TVA, but I think I'd like to hear Don's and Tom's perspective, although I have a feeling I can guess Tom's perspective on this. The question says, ExxonMobil said last week that coal with carbon capture and storage will be cheaper than wind and solar by 2040. Do you agree?
By 2040.
Be great for consumers, right?
That's right. That was the Future Gen plan originally. But
I have no way of knowing that.
Well, I don't think it's not a knowledge. It's a vote question. It's a speculation question. But
yeah, I think it's possible, but it's going to take a breakthrough in the technology development.
right.
Yeah, without knowing what they're estimating for cents per kilowatt hour, I have no idea.
I will say, and the drop in solar and wind over the last just few years is amazing. So if we do get that with a coal resource at some time in the future, which we have an abundance of, once again, great for consumers.
Right.
When there's some parts of the country today where wind is cost competitive with existing, or new gas, I should say, new coal, new nuclear, everything. And TVA and Dominion are not buying wind because they have a state RPS that tells them they have to. They're buying it because they want a diverse portfolio, which we also support. We're not calling for 100% wind energy. And Xcel is buying wind beyond their RPS obligation because it's most affordable. The other utilities in the Southeast that I mentioned earlier that have bought wind under contract are doing it because it's the most cost-effective option for them. They couldn't get it through their economic regulators otherwise because there are not RPSs that are obligating them to do so. So again, without knowing the cents per kilowatt hour, I don't have a 2040 crystal ball, but wind is generally affordable in all parts of the country today.
Well, and this next question then is for you, Bob, that the questioner wonders, why is TVA only considering renewables at small scale, that's in quotes, that wind also in that mountainside area could be a large-scale resource?
Yeah, I'm not sure I said we're only considering
I
small
was going to say,
scale.
I didn't
So we do have major wind contracts where,
Okay.
wind is a key component in our expansion plans. And on the solar side, we have two 20-megawatt solar farms coming online down in, if anybody's a Civil War historian buff, Shiloh, Tennessee area. And I believe that particular project has an option for another two 20 megawatts. So it would be a total of 80 megawatts of solar in southwest Tennessee. So no, that we're not only thinking about small scale, which is, a lot of small scale projects are customer driven, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure there are options there for customers, and the larger projects in the megawatt size are utility driven, and we want to make sure we marry those in a least cost fashion.
And a question came in for both Dominion and TVA on your integrated resource planning process and the pending proposal that you have. Do you see a significant change in that with the 111D process? Obviously, we don't know what the requirements are going to be, but if you were to take the president's commitment in terms of overall greenhouse gas emissions, and you take the electricity sector's share of that as a broad brush, and then you take the state budget in a sense, we know what the state emission profiles are, you can sort of engineer a range at least that you would plan around. Is that a major conflict with your existing IRP, or is it an area where you're going to have to do a great deal of work to achieve reconciliation on that?
I can answer first. I mentioned we had a number of options, and you're right, the only person who knows what EPA's rules are going to say has now left the room.
Right.
So all the rest of us, are speculating, but I mentioned earlier we submitted a number of options in our IRP, one of which would have achieved the president's 17% below 2005 levels. So, the options are in there. What we have to consider is reliability of the grid and cost. And there is definitely a big cost difference depending on what carbon outcome you want to get to. And that's why it's so important that everybody understand, for these options that we can put on the table, and we did have a number of options in IRP already there. Mm. What are the cost implications, and what does that mean to the consumer? And is that the way we want to go? So it's just considering everything together and making the best decision.
This is sorry.
No, I just wanted to agree 100%. The only thing I would add is timing as well.
Timing.
Right? Mm-hmm. So you've got cost and timing kind of all playing in the same, just balancing that big sphere. But yes, absolutely.
So
I think reliability plays a big role in that too, and we can't afford to get our energy mix too biased one way or the other. I was at some meetings within the last couple of weeks, and many of the coal-fired plants that are actually scheduled for retirement were running full tilt during this latest cold wave because the gas transmission capability wasn't there to deliver gas for residential use and industrial and home heating use. So we have to be careful about that.
I thought Colette had a good characterization of that when she talked about the three-legged stool of reliability, customer accessibility, and company financial stability, and the idea
Absolutely.
that this rule is going to have to hit the sweet spot on all three of those, or it's not going to succeed in achieving its goals. It's critical. We had an interesting question about cap and trade. You'll all recall back in 2007, 2008, you had both presidential candidates favoring a cap and trade system. You had what appeared to be a great deal of momentum in Congress moving towards a cap and trade proposal, and then the wheels came off, the thing crashed and burned, and now cap and trade is almost a third rail political issue going forward. The questioner wonders whether the negative political connotations of cap and trade could be overcome if industry, in reaction to the 111D proposal, really beats the drum that cap and trade approach, and I would say with states as well, that the cap and trade approach is a more effective, cost-effective option than regulation under the Clean Air Act. This is another speculative question, but do you hold out any hope that at some point Congress will realize that we are headed down a less than optimal path here?
Well, I guess I would choose to say that we're not going to get ahead of what we see in June. So I don't know that I would feel comfortable saying that folks will, in my area, either at TVA or in the 9 states we serve in, that they're going to get excited about cap and trade or not. I just until we see the rules, I can't really speculate out that way.
At Dominion, we've always said that we think a national energy plan where you consider the energy, the reliability, and the price and the environment all together is the best solution. Obviously Congress would probably have an important role in that. That's of course not where we are. Where we are is EPA working on the new source performance standards for new and existing units, and then states, thankfully, having the flexibility to implement them in the best way for that state. So realistically, to me, the only way the current path could change would be after we get the either proposed or final 111D rule, and we start working on the strategies as to what it would take to actually comply with what the rule actually says. If the price tag is reasonable, my expectation we'd continue on the current path. If the price tag turned out to be unreasonable, then I would expect that states would point that out to the members of Congress, and perhaps we would all take a different path.
From a supplier perspective, what we saw, in the early '80s and on through the rest of the previous decades was that the market in SO2 credits and the market in NOx credits was actually a very effective way to get the reductions that were being looked for by the environmental agencies, and it pushed the addition of those kind of scrubbers and SCRs and low NOx burners to those units that were the largest units, the most efficient units, because those were the units our customers wanted to keep in service the longest. So there is some history that some form of cap and trade, if you will, has worked well, at least from our perspective, looking into the industries.
And I know the EPA administrator said this morning she's not looking to impose cap and trade through 111D, but you can get aspects of the benefits of cap and trade through interstate trading, at a minimum fleet-wide trading, but potentially with other sources as well. So I think from our perspective, we're focused on the EPA rulemaking, and if it looks like there may be interest on the Hill, we're happy to talk about that, but we don't see that right now.
Okay. Question on combined heat and power. Both of you have spoken favorably about the role CHP can play in reducing emissions, enhancing reliability. Do you have plans, either as part of the IRP process or otherwise, to be reaching out to industrials to help identify, finance, and maintain those types of projects?
So one of the things that I'm actually working on in my assignment at TVA is, in fact, developing a CHP business plan for TVA. We have not had one. We have been fairly hit or miss in how we bring projects through, and quite frankly, I think we're at a place where we need to be a little more consumer focused around customers' needs and wants in that CHP arena.
Great. Pam?
I mentioned earlier, we do have an alternative energy solutions group, and we do work closely with our customers. I'm not aware of any specific projects right now, but if you're our customer and you're interested in that, come see us.
Don, from your perspective, selling into the industry, is this are there best practices, or are there areas where this is occurring in a positive and strong way?
Well, you know, a lot of our customers are actually paper companies, and they've been doing CHP for forever.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We are seeing inquiries in the last, I don't know, year or so for other industrial customers who are looking to, primarily probably driven by the industrial MAT rules, looking to get off of a coal base or that kind of thing. And they're coming to us and asking us, do we have large capacity package boilers, you know, high pressure package boilers that they could bring in and replace that capacity with. So I think between biomass solutions at places that already have access to biomass and places where they have availability of gas and can convert old coal-fired units to gas, yeah, I think that's coming on.
I would, as I've been researching this assignment, I've come across a neighbor, Baltimore Gas and Electric, who is doing some very good work. They have a RFP that they've issued earlier this year. I think they had 16 responses, and of which, in talking to their program team last week, potentially 8 or 10 projects. So if anybody's a Baltimore Gas and Electric customer, they might want to research that option as well.
Excellent. Another question from the audience. As you look at 111D and what is possible in the realm, are there adequate flexibilities for states to address reliability concerns? And then what specifically would you recommend EPA do to accommodate those reliability concerns? It's the curse of sitting right next to the moderator, is you've got...
Reliability is critical. Cost is critical. And so, you know, I think states, of course TVA, we're all going to have to work together, roll our sleeves up, and this gets back to, you know, collaboration, this will be successful. Lack of collaboration, this will be a failure. So that's just, you know, reliability is one of those, you know, 3 prongs, I guess, we talked about earlier, and there's no way you can talk about one without the others, and in talking about all of them, you know, I would hope that whoever's putting their fingers into the action plans will, you know, take that 3-legged approach.
Pam?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. You know, it's exactly what we've been saying all along. You know, EPA has got to allow the states flexibility to deal with state-specific situations. You know, sometimes that might be interstate work, sometimes that might have to do with the timing, and other times it might have to be giving the states the authority to grant exceptions or whatever you might want to call it if you do create reliability concerns. Listening to the administrator this morning, I don't believe it is her intent to cause reliability concerns. Right. So, you know, I'm encouraged that EPA will in fact write the flexibility into the rule so that we don't have reliability problems, but I can assure you when the draft comes out, we have an opportunity to comment. If there's something in there that we believe will present reliability comments, we will vigorously comment.
Excellent. Another question from the audience. Beyond environmental regulations, what is motivating your efforts, we talked a lot about them, to diversify and the other approaches that you've taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, you know, as I started earlier this morning, it's really about listening to our customers. And our customers are asking us for balance. Balance is the right way to mitigate risk. I think you mentioned if we put all of our eggs in one basket or another, we get out of balance. Then you get hit with a gas bubble burst, and all of a sudden gas prices go up, and you're hedged that way. And so balance, listening to customers, keeping the eye on reliability and cost, and I believe you get to the right answer.
I agree.
Another question from the audience, that the issue in many other environmental regulations is that the benefits and the costs are quantifiable and known. You may argue about the numbers on either side, But in this area, the cost of inaction on climate change, the cost of not addressing greenhouse gas emissions reductions is a hugely controversial and inchoate area. And so how, as a resource planning exercise, do you ever factor in a cost-benefit analysis of steps you're going to take to reduce greenhouse gases? Or does it not really come up? It's a response to a regulation, and therefore this is the least cost method to adequately comply with the regulation?
Well, I can tell you, it comes up a lot in our conversations with our resource planning team. And you handle this by running, your sophisticated model through the scenarios. Mm-hmm. And you can try to put some bounds on cost for everything. Mm-hmm. And so you can make some assumptions about cost to implement, which, the inverse of the cost to implement is the benefit to achieve, right?
Right.
So yeah, this was what planners get, the big bucks to do.
It's just one more example of why it's so important that we have our energy regulators and our environmental regulators talking to each other at all the levels. They need to talk to each other at the federal levels. Well, EPA can bring the societal costs that you're talking about to the table. The regulators can bring the cost of the consumers to the table. And all those need to be looked at and balanced together so they can make the best decisions. And the same thing needs to happen at the state level, where all the stakeholders are involved, so everybody can bring their input, whether it be the bigger costs or the more localized costs, and make the best decisions. It's not a simple equation. It's a very complex equation, which is why it's so important, more important than probably with most environmental rules, that all the stakeholders get together and talk about it to make the best overall decision.
Let me just build on that, because I think it's important. It is a complex set of equations, multiple variables on a forward-going basis, but it's not an unknown space to either states that have done detailed integrated resource plans or utilities that are working under integrated resource planning statutes. The integrated resource planning approach has the ability to incorporate additional costs as they come up in society. So I'm not sure we need to spend a lot of time reinventing new models. Right? If we work this through an integrated resource planning model, either at the state or at the utility level, I do think we at least have the foundational work already set, and we're not going to be spending, thousands of man hours, literally millions of dollars, with consultants developing new models. I would hope that we could work through the models we have and try to include these additional variables that will get us to the right answers, which we've been comfortable with the last 30 years of resource planning, of the outcomes. Add a few new variables is better than starting with a new model.
And EPA has put a bogey out there in terms of their estimated social cost of carbon, and notwithstanding that it's controversial, that's the number that presumably you plan around and PUCs would have no choice but to accept.
I think, from a supplier standpoint too, we've spent a lot of time over the last 20 years probably with I'll call it with our finger in the air, trying to figure out which way the wind's blowing. And we saw many years ago that a carbon-constrained generating environment was probably going to be coming at us sooner or later. So we started our efforts in carbon capture. We started our efforts in ultra supercritical stuff and that sort of thing. So our job then is to have a diverse portfolio of solutions that when our customers decide what they've got to do, then we'll be ready to help them out. But there's a lot of R&D, there's a lot of cooperation with DOE that goes into that, but that's kind of where we are as suppliers.
Yeah, it's good. I was just going to echo that at the end of the day, whether you agree on the exact dollar amount of social cost or carbon or not, or really whether you agree that climate change is a bad thing or not, our view is that the utilities should have a diverse portfolio for risk reasons. And that's risk on availability of a certain technology, that's risk to diversify price, it's risk on just general resource risk. This is the same way we all diversify, hopefully anyway, your investment portfolio. You want to diversify your electricity portfolio, and that as was said, is something that the IRP process looks at anyway.
Great. Another question from the audience. This is about the differences between state rate-making structures and sort of, the presence or absence of decoupling for energy efficiency programs. How does that impact your ability to embrace outside the fence line solutions and options here?
Well, for us, we're a wholesaler. So the end use, through our 155 communities and co-ops in the region, they're setting that. And we have really started a conversation in about the last 18 months to make sure we're correctly capturing cost of service buckets. The cost to read the meter versus the cost to serve the distribution grid versus the cost for the transmission grid, all the ancillary services. We've got to get those costs right. Then you can start talking about how might you disaggregate, a rate that is based on, a total use per kilowatt hour.
Pam, perspective on that?
Yeah, obviously you need, if you want to encourage energy efficiency, you need to put rate structures in place that encourage it. So that gets back to the environmental regulators and the energy regulators coordinating with others. What's the desired outcome? Is it simply lowest cost? That might argue towards one type of set of encouragements and rate structure. Is it to also reduce emissions? And how do you balance those? So that's why it's important that the different regulators work with each other so they can come up with a solution that addresses both of their concerns.
And there are some utilities at rate base. There are wind energy, for example. So I think that the market driver would be similar, the regulatory driver would be similar for those kind of utilities. But for utilities that want to purchase the wind as opposed to owning it and operating it, that's a legitimate issue and one that we are trying to think through of what is that incentive, for example, to go beyond your RPS or to use wind as a compliance option for 111D.
Thank you, Tom. And let's start this one with Don and Tom, mix it up a little bit. So industrial and large commercial retailers, do you see a tension or an opportunity there regarding an interest from large consumers of electricity to seek out renewable energy and energy efficiency?
I see a tension or an opportunity. I guess really it's an opportunity. At the end of the day, all conflict is an opportunity. And it's up to us to figure out how we navigate that kind of tightrope that's a little bit crooked at this point.
Mm-hmm. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely viewed it as an opportunity. There are some big users that do on-site renewables, whether it's wind, solar, or something else. We have also seen a trend over the last year or two of big industrial users, particularly in the tech world, of wanting to buy renewables directly from a project or working with their local utility for what's currently sort of been called green tariffs to provide them an opportunity to buy a specific product sort of outside of the normal resource portfolio that the utility provides. So I think both of those are an opportunity for both the industrial customers as well as the utilities.
Yeah.
So I hesitate to ask a question that starts, what will happen? But Tom, let's stick with you on this. Tax subsidies for renewables. On again, off again, on again, off again, currently off again. Action in the Senate Finance Committee, uncertainty about the House Ways and Means. How has this intermittency of the tax credit and the potential for their expiration altogether impacted your industry's planning process, profitability, deployment rate, those kinds of things?
Well, I think a lot of folks have probably seen our boom-bust chart that shows when the tax incentive expires, the deployment drops off significantly. We saw that last year with the very late extension in January. Deployment dropped from 13 gigawatts in 2012 to a little over 1, I think it was, in 2013. We do expect a rebound this year and next year, and we do expect the tax credit will be extended. I think a few months ago, people didn't even expect an extender's bill to get through the Senate Finance Committee, and here we are with a bipartisan bill that got through Senate Finance. So long term, who knows? But as we were talking cost earlier, the costs of wind have come down 40% over the last 5 years. Both EIA and Lazard, a private consulting firm, have said that wind is second only to natural gas in terms of combined cycle, in terms of the affordability of new generation, and that's the levelized cost of energy, so that's the unsubsidized cost. So I think we as a WEA have said there will be a point in time where the PTC will go away and we won't need it anymore. And I think we'll have to prepare for that. But for the time being, we do believe that it will be extended.
Okay, Bob and Pam, Tom just mentioned natural gas. Obviously, we would be in a very different position today if we were trying to embark on this path and we hadn't had the shale gas boom. But to what extent, and this is another audience question, to what extent is increased natural gas generation, quote, the answer, unquote, for 111D? And conversely, what are the limitations of reliance on natural gas?
I'll start. It's made a big difference. We've all talked about how much our emissions have already gone down and our projections of our emissions continuing to go down. And a lot of that, some of it's due to the economy, but a lot of it is due to use of natural gas instead of coal. And so natural gas is a big part of the solution, but I think most folks would agree, and Dominion certainly believes, that too much reliance on natural gas would be a mistake. We have to have a diverse generation mix. You can't have only natural gas. When it was somebody mentioned the cold snap we had earlier this year.
Yep.
During that cold snap, I know we had to call in some of our oil units. I mean, who would have thought?
Really?
So having the diversity of fuels is very key. Natural gas is a big part of the solution, but it cannot be the only part of the solution.
Yeah, I would agree completely. TVA's been on a path. We have 23% or reduced our carbon output by 23% since 2005. We expect that number to be about 40% by 2020, below 2005 levels. And we've accomplished that with a balance. Once again, it's a balance. But certainly that balance is got a large share of increased in new natural gas-fired units. We have a large unit in northern Mississippi that's just come on in the last year. We're looking at some additional units in western Tennessee. And we see that as being almost a perfect balance. 2020, we're talking about 40% nuclear, 20% coal, 20% gas, and 20% of everything else.
All right, we are just about out of time, and so what I'd like to do as a small reward for your time and patience here today is let's just go down starting with Tom this time. Any final thoughts, point you didn't get a chance to make, or something you'd like to reiterate?
On your point about collaboration, I think, for whatever it's worth, anytime we have talked to a regulator or an air person or an energy person, they've always said, go talk to my compatriot in these other areas. So I think that level of collaboration we have not seen before, and I think we're optimistic that it will continue, and it's to everybody's benefit, wind energy, utilities, et cetera, to have that level of engagement and cooperation. Because for us, some of it is honestly about myth busting, some of which we've got to talk about here and on the earlier panel. But I think that wherever the EPA goes, that there are a variety of compliance options, including wind, that can help us get there.
I think from our standpoint as a supplier, the collaboration for us probably means talking with folks like Dominion and TVA and understanding what their strategies are evolving to, and then bringing that back to B&W or if it's Alstom or Foster Wheeler or whoever, for us to bring it back to our people and set up the right kind of R&D programs that are going to support those strategies.
Great.
Implementation of the President's Climate Action Plan and EPA's greenhouse gas rules have the potential to significantly affect the cost of energy in the United States and also the reliability of energy, which is so important that EPA build as much flexibility as possible into the rules, that the states make wise decisions in implementation of the rules, and it's going to take all of the above, all the fuels, energy efficiency, and all of the measures we've been talking about today in order to achieve whatever goals the administrator sets for us going forward.
Yeah, I just want to close with cost, and we can't lose sight of the fact that those costs are going to be paid for by real people. And where I come from, we have a large population of folks who already can't afford their current bills. So we're going to have to look at everything that under the stars that we can to help them manage their bills. And that's focusing on rates, on all the cost components that make up the rate, and it's also focused on use and all of the really exciting things on the efficiency side that, maybe we can help our folks live in a little bit better structures, and maybe we can help our businesses use this resource as wisely and efficiently as possible. So we've got to make sure we keep our eye on who's impacted.
I think that's a great way to end this session. Please join me in thanking the panelists. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.